Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Piyush. This is day 2 in 30 days of AWS Terraform. In this video, we'll be looking into Terraform providers. Before we actually do the hands-on, before we start writing Terraform scripts and before we actually start provisioning the infrastructure, it is important to understand what actually is a provider, because provider is the plugin. Provider is something that does everything for you, and it's not really a good advice to continue the learning without understanding the Terraform provider. So let's start with the provider then. So what exactly it is? As you see, it bridges the gap between your Terraform, the installable, the binary of Terraform, and your cloud provider. Okay, so it's basically a plugin that translate your Terraform code into the code that your cloud provider understand. Okay, so let me give you more example. So you have your cloud providers over here, right? So when you are provisioning a resource with your cloud provider such as AWS, you want to create an S3 bucket, let's say. So you are actually calling AWS S3 API to provision the resource for you. Whether you are using Cloud Console or whether you are using CLI commands or any other thing, right? So you are actually calling the API of AWS S3. Now, how Terraform will do that for you? Because even if you are using Terraform, you are still calling the AWS API. So Terraform will do that with the help of AWS Terraform Provider. Okay. So these providers are nothing but the plugins that translate Terraform code, because as I've told you, this Terraform code is written into .tf format, which is basically HCL language, right? HashiCorp configuration language. And then your cloud providers such as AWS, Azure, or GCP, they do not understand the HCL language, right? So we need a plugin that translate this HCL language to the language that your cloud API understand. So that's what this provider does for you, right? So when you use Terraform provider, you actually first initialize the provider using Terraform init command, and then you actually download, like you don't have to download it, but it automatically download the Terraform provider for you, so that whenever you run any Terraform command, it will translate that code automatically for you. Like we'll see that everything in action, right? So there are different type of Terraform providers. There are official, there are partner provider, and then there are community providers. Community providers as in which is maintained by open source community. Official such as AWS, Azure, GCP. And then there are partner provider, which is not maintained by AWS or like these cloud providers, but maintained by third party. So there are different type of Terraform providers. This is what I have already explained. And these target APIs that you are hitting with your provider, these target APIs could be your cloud provider's endpoint, or these could be other services such as Docker, Kubernetes, Datadog, Prometheus, Grafana, and many more, right? So that's all about provider, what exactly it is. Now, I want you to go to the Terraform documentation and get yourself familiar with how does it work. Okay, so what you're gonna do is search for Terraform AWS Provider. Okay, and go to this link which says registry.terraform.io. Okay, go over here, and then you will see a page something like this. Okay, what it is the AWS provider page, the main landing page, and on the left side you will see all the services that this provider support. So using AWS Terraform provider, you can provision infrastructure within AWS of all of these services that are supported. As you can see, there are a lot. I think almost all the services are covered as part of it, right? Now, the important thing to understand is Terraform provider has a version, and the same way Terraform itself has its version. So there are two different versions. So if we go back, okay, over here, we'll see the example of a Terraform provider file, like how does it look like. So it is, as you can see, enclosed within Terraform. Terraform is the main, what you call is the at the root level, and inside that you specify your providers like AWS, Azure, or GCP, and then there are some third party providers such as Random. Random is a type of provider by HashiCorp, which helps you generate random strings or random values for different use cases, such as, let's say you want to generate a unique name for your S3 bucket. So you can use this random provider to generate a random name for your bucket. That's all that's the provider block, and inside that there is, as you can see, required version. Now this required version is your Terraform version. So over here, this version is your provider version, which is 6.7.0, and over here it is your Terraform version, which is 1.0. This one, 3.1, is your version of random provider. Okay, and here you specify your provider block for, like, let's say AWS, and inside that you can hard code some config, like you can hard code secrets, you can hard code region authentication. But like, again, I have not added the secret key and secret access ID, is because it's not really a best practice to do that. You don't want to hard code your secrets in the provider config. That's why I have not used it, not even for the example. But I was just telling you that. But let's say if I have used region over here, US East 1, that means when we initialize this provider, by default it will take US East 1 as your region. Okay, so now you don't have to, obviously you don't have to remember everything, right? So how do you write your first provider config? Is you go over here in the doc, and on the right side if you see use provider, so when you click on that, it will generate the code for you. Okay, so the same code that we have just seen over there, and you can start using it. So it has your required provider, which is the provider version for your AWS, and then it has your provider AWS config. It does not have the Terraform version. Why it doesn't have? Because if you don't specify the Terraform version, by default it will take the latest version. Okay, so if you go over here, we need to understand why does version matters, and why can't we just use the latest Terraform version, which is the default as well. And I'll tell you why. So if you don't specify, yes, latest version will be used, but your configuration might not be compatible with the latest version. So you see, you have a Terraform version, and then you have a provider version. Your providers are maintained separately than Terraform itself. Your Terraform binary and the version of it is maintained by HashiCorp, right? It's their official product, Terraform. But then when we talk about your Terraform providers, so in this case, AWS provider is maintained by AWS community or AWS itself. So it's not maintained by Terraform. So there are high chances that there are compatibility issues between the Terraform provider version and the Terraform version if it is not tested properly, and if it has not been stable enough, if it is just new, right? So that is why we need to lock the version. And how do we lock the version, and how do we know which version we should use? So the version that you use to develop your Terraform code at the first place and tested your Terraform configuration with, you should use that version. And whenever you want, like, let's say your version is outdated and like it's been a long time that you have updated it to the newest possible version, first you need to test it thoroughly with the latest version or with the whatever version you are upgrading to in your known prod environment. Once you have run all your tests, everything works fine, then only you do that in your production environment, right? So it is really important to understand why do we need the version and why it matters. Now, there are a lot of things about version that you need to understand. So let's understand the version constraints, like what it is. So as you see over here, we see the version, which is provider version, right? So in this example, or in this example as well, so this version inside required provider block, it's your provider version, right? Which will look something like this. And then there is required version, which is yeah, I think, which is what I have shown you over here. Yeah, required version, this one, this is your Terraform version, your Terraform core version, or your Terraform binary version. Now these two are different. And you also would have noticed, like, I have used certain operators with it, right? So over here there is a tilde sign, and then there is a arrow, and over here as well there is sign. So what are these? These are nothing but the operators that you use with the version. let's understand what are these different operators. So equal to is like what is logical equal to, that means it would match the exact same version. So if I have written like version equal to 6.7.0, so it will not upgrade even if the newest version is available, it will always stick to 6.7.0. And not equal to means it will exclude the exact version and it will use any other latest available version. So this is your operator over here and this is your version. Now, what are these? Less than equal to, greater than equal to, and how does it work? So what it does, it does a Boolean comparison and it will allow the version if it is true. Okay, what do we mean by that? So let's say it is less than, that means version. Okay, I'll just write it down over here. Let's say this is version less than 6.7.0. So that means it will use the version just one less than this. So maybe 6.11 or something, whatever it is, the previous version of this, and it will stick to that, right? It will not upgrade it. Similarly, oh, sorry, I said the other way around. So that was this, what I already talked about. Now, if I talk about greater than, so greater than meaning it will always go with the higher version than 6.7.0. It could be 6.8, it could be 6.7.1, 6.7.2, anything but greater than this. If it is available, it will use that. Similarly, greater than equal to, less than equal to work. Now, what exactly is equal to and then this sign over here? So tilde less than, the one that we just saw above. What does it mean is TF can install, like Terraform can install the version 6.7.0 and anything greater than that but 6.7.1. Okay, because only the last patch version will be changed, right? So because it says version should be greater than and then this tilde sign, that means it should be 6.7.1 or 6.7.2 or 6.7.3, anything that is available, but it cannot be 6.8, right? It will not exceed this, the middle part of it, right? So it should be anything which is greater than 6.7.0 but less than 6.8, because the middle part cannot change. So that's what it means. And if the version that you have used is, let's say, 6.7, okay, so there is no dot zero, or maybe like, let's say not in this case, let's keep it the way it is. Okay, I'll just keep it the way it is and let's use that in place of the Terraform version. So Terraform version is, let's say, if we have specified tilde greater than equal to 1.0. Okay, so what do we mean by that is it will go above 1.0 if it is available, but it will only change the last part, which is, let's say, 1.2 or 1.3 or 1.4, but it cannot go to 2.0. Okay, let's take another example. I'm pretty sure it is confusing, but once you understand this part, it is pretty easy. So let's take this example. Okay, so if you take the version as 1.0.4 with this tilde sign and greater than sign, that means Terraform can install 1.0.5, 1.0.10, 1.0.7, but not 1.1.0. This middle part cannot change. Only the last part will change. Similarly, if we use tilde 1.1, so Terraform can install 1.2, 1.3 up to 1.10, but not 2.0. Why? Only last part will change in this as well. So that's how the version works, and that's how the version matters in Terraform. Okay, so do a little practice, try to understand from the docs as well over here, and you will get the idea, right? So now we are going to write our first Terraform script. So we'll always start with the Terraform provider. Okay, so what you could do, you could just use a file. Okay, name it main.tf or provider.tf, anything for now, because we'll be doing a lot of things in upcoming videos and I don't want to fit everything in one single video, right? I have to go step by step so that everyone will understand. So what we'll do, You can either copy it from here, like the provider config, or you can copy it from here. I can just generate the code from GitHub Copilot or from any LLM that I'm using, but I won't suggest it because you should always consider this Terraform documentation as the latest or as the single source of truth, because it changes really frequently and most of the LLMs might not have all the up to date information, right? Because it get trained on the data from time to time. It's not a real time data. So what you can do is you can just copy it from here and then we'll see everything about it. Okay, so let's go over here, and in this folder that I have used earlier, so I'm just gonna create another folder. Okay, let's create another folder and let's call it day02, and inside that I'm gonna create a file main.tf. All right, okay, how do I open it? Oh, I think it has created a folder, so let me just delete this. Okay, inside this let's create main.tf. Okay, now because I already have the Terraform extension installed, that's why it is showing the symbol, and it will provide me all the auto completions and errors if there are any syntactical errors. So make sure you have the Terraform extension installed. Okay, now I've pasted the code that I have copied from the documentation. So over here, I'm using the latest version, but I'm locking it to 6.0. And if you know what it is doing, it will upgrade it to 6 till 6.10 whenever it is available, but it will not go to 7.0 even if it is available. So I'm locking the Terraform provider version so that I don't face any compatibility issues, because this is the major version and this is the minor version. I can take risk with the minor versions considering there are only bug fixes and no major feature change, but going from 6 to 7 could include a major release, and that's where you need to do proper testing before you do that, right? So that's what I'm doing right now. And then you need to configure your provider. This part is optional, so you can leave the blank, but you need to have the provider block, right? So you just need to have provider AWS block. And over here I'm creating a resource. Okay, just an example, we'll see this in detail. What do we do, how do we do it? But for now, this is the resource we are creating in AWS VPC. So how does it work? Resource, this is the resource keyword. Whenever we need to create any resource in Terraform, we start with resource keyword. Then this is the resource type, which is AWS underscore VPC. Now, how do we know what resource type we need to use? Let's go back to the documentation. Over here, search for VPC, right? So currently there are multiple things. There are data sources, resources. So there are data sources and resources. Data sources will cover later on. Just focus on resources for now, okay? So search for VPC resource over here. Let's see where it is, because a lot of resources starts with VPC, but over here you see inside VPC there are multiple sub resources for network ACL, route table, subnet, VPC, and so on. So this is what we need to use, AWS default VPC. Okay. So where it is, I just need to look at an example. Okay, let's see AWS VPC, not the default VPC. Okay, so this is what we need. Okay, so resource AWS VPC, which is the resource type, and this is what we have used already, right? So forget about the rest of the things for now. We just need to test the basic usage, right? So that's what I have already copied. Okay, so let's go back over here, and it's gonna use a field CIDR block. So if you go back, so there is a CIDR block. Now, if you scroll down and you will see the argument reference. So these are the fields that are inside that resource block. Okay. So region is optional. I can have a region listed over there, but region is optional. Even CIDR block is optional. So all the fields inside the CIDR, inside the VPC resource, as you can see, are optional. So that means it will use some default values to create it, right? So everything is optional. If there are some mandatory field, we have to add that field. Otherwise, it will throw some error. So what all fields are there? Let's see. And this example over here, this is not the VPC name. This is the local name of the resource through which we'll refer it internally within Terraform. Like, let's say if I have to create another resource, okay, so let's call it resource, let's say EC2 server, right? So AWS EC2, is this the resource? EC2. With EC2, there are a lot of resources. So EC2, maybe host. It's not actually EC2 server, but let's just for the sake of this example. So if I use this, now how do I provide the value of AWS VPC that create this EC2 host within this VPC, right? So what I do over here is there might be a field for VPC ID, right? So this is what I'm gonna do, right? VPC ID is equal to, first you need to provide the resource type, so which is AWS underscore VPC is the resource type. I have actually GitHub Copilot installed, that's why it is auto completing it, but I'm just gonna type it out so that you will understand, right? So AWS underscore VPC, which is this, the resource type. Now I need to refer this VPC, so I have to provide this name over here. So this is the internal reference of Terraform. So AWS underscore VPC dot example. And now, as you can see, I have to provide VPC ID over here. We don't know the ID, but Terraform knows it from this resource once it is created, right? So example.id, that's how we can get the ID of VPC. Okay, so I'm just gonna delete it for now. Okay, so what are we doing? Just a quick recap. We have initialized the provider over here, provider config, and just a simple VPC resource. Okay, now I'll just go inside the folder day02 and run my first command, which is, let's just maximize it, which is tf init. If you remember in the previous video, I already created the alias for Terraform with the name tf. So that's what I'm gonna run, tf init. This is the first command. This will initialize the Terraform. This will initialize the backend. Backend we'll talk about later on, but it will, as you can see, it has initialized the provider plugin. Okay, so what is this provider plugin? If you remember, we talked about that a provider is a plugin that helps us translate code, the Terraform files to the API, like the way API expect the input. So this provider will be downloaded in your current directory. So there is a directory created .terraform. If you expand this, there is a license file and there is a provider plugin over here, as you can see. Because I am in Mac, so this is in the format of Mac. If you are in Windows and running this, this will be an exe or .msi file. If you are on Linux, it could be a different extension. It auto detect the operating system, and based on that, it download the plugin, right? And yes, so it has initialized the Terraform. Now if I need to run tf plan, what it will do, it will check the config. Okay, oh, there is an error. So what it says, retrieving AWS account details, validity, valid credential, caller identity. So basically it is saying you don't have permission because I have not really done the authentication and authorization with AWS yet. So there are multiple ways and we'll look all of those ways later on. But for now, I'm just gonna talk about the simplest way. So you can just run AWS configure. I'm sure I might have shown it in the previous video, but even if I haven't, so this is how you can do it. Run AWS configure and it will ask you a few details. It will ask you, make sure you have AWS CLI installed. Okay, and I'm not sure why it is stuck. Okay, yeah. So it's asking me AWS access key ID, which I can go to my AWS login page. All right. Sign into console. Okay, let's go to my account. Let's select my user, hit enter, and we can go to IAM. Okay, over here it is. and then inside IAM, let's click on any user that have access to create S3 bucket, or you can create a new user if you want. So let's create a new user, S3 create. Okay, hit next. Attach policy directly, and let's search for S3 bucket access policy. Okay, so let's say S3 full access. Okay, hit next, create user. Okay, now S3 create, this is the user. Now go inside the user, and we need to go to security credentials over here and generate an access key over here. Okay, so this is the key that we'll be using it. Now it will ask you different options like how are you planning to use these keys. So I'm gonna select CLI. Okay, it is asking you, there are alternatives, which is you can just run it directly from here, which is AWS Cloud Shell, or you can use CLI v2 and enable authentication through a user in IAM Identity Center. Maybe we'll do that later on. For now, for the sake of simplicity, we'll just select the CLI option. Okay, and I understand the recommendation and hit next. Now hit create access keys. Now this is the access key ID. Copy it and go over here and just run it. Now it is asking secret access key, which is this one over here. Copy it and just paste it over here. Hit enter. Now default region is US East 1. It might have taken it from the main.tf, so we have it inside. Okay, not this one. We have it inside this section, right? US East 1, the provider config. So it has taken it from there. So I'm just gonna hit enter and hit enter one more time, and that's it. So now I have initialized myself with the AWS configure. That means I have authenticated myself. Now I can access the resources. I have the permissions that is being provided with this access key, which is S3. So I can create a S3 bucket, I can delete S3 bucket, and so on. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just run Terraform plan now. Okay, so Terraform plan, as you can see, it has created an state file. Where did it go? It was just here, I just saw it. Anyways, we'll talk about it later on. There is Terraform plan. What it has done, it has created an state file. Okay, I'm not getting into specific of state file because that's the topic for a different day. So for now, just consider that Terraform, what it will do, it will compare your TF file or your Terraform configuration files with your actual environment, right? So the environment in which you have authenticated, it will check if there is an AWS VPC. Oh, I made a mistake. I have not provided the access to S3 bucket. Maybe we'll do that later. But for now, just understand my credential only have access to manage S3 bucket. But I'm trying to create a VPC resource, so it should fail. But it will not fail in the planning phase, because in the planning, it has not made the API call yet. It has just checked with the Terraform state file. So there is a state file. What it will do is it will check your Terraform configuration if it is matching with the environment. So it will go and compare that. So it will find that, oh, this resource has not been created yet. So this resource is there in your TF file, but it's not there in your environment. So you need to create it. So that's what it is showing, right? It will show that Terraform will perform the following action. AWS VPC will be created with all these fields. And there are some fields which has values such as CIDR block, because I have provided that. But the rest of the fields, like there are some IDs, some host name, and these will be known after apply, because you wouldn't know the ID before the object or resource is already created, right? So that's why it is known after apply. And over here, it will show you the summary, like plan is 1 to add, 0 to change, 0 to destroy. That means there is one new addition to the infrastructure. There are no updates to be made, and there are no resources to be destroyed. Okay. So we'll look that into later video. In this video, I wanted you to see how the Terraform provider works. So that's it for this video. We're gonna stop it right here because I don't want to overburden you with a lot of details. We have covered Terraform provider in depth. Now I want you to stop right here, and in the next video we'll see further details like how do we create resources in Terraform with a continuation to this video. Okay, I hope this video was valuable and I'm not trying to pace things up. I'm just trying to go step by step, one step at a time, so that it will not be a rush for you as well. Even if you are a beginner, you will fully understand and follow along. Okay, so that's it, and I will see you soon with the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good day.